Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. After almost a year since he had his soul taken by Deontay Wilder, Dominic Breazeale, the beaten title challenger, has called out Dillian Whyte, and this is reported by Sky Sports, and I'll come to some of this coverage a little bit later on and a few thoughts on what we're seeing in the lockdown. Breazeale is talking all greasy about Whyte and what he would do and what sort of fight they would have. And I think to a few people this will come as a surprise because Dominic Breazeale not in the title picture. Really at the moment this is hollow words, and I want to have a little bit of fun with this because Dominic Breazeale might still think he's a player in the heavyweight division, but at the moment he's on the outside looking in. But we'll get to his quotes and then the thoughts because, I kind of see this coming from left field. But I guess, Breazeale, he's a prize fighter. He still thinks he's a player, but, he is delusional. So he says, I think it's a pressure style fight. He's going to bring it for a bit. I'm going to bring it for a bit. In the end, the fans are going to be very pleased with what they get out of a fight between myself and Dillian Whyte. He's a knockout artist, loves to throw leather with bad intentions, and I like to do the same. I think I have the upper hand on him as far as strength and athletic ability. Of course, with size. In the end, I think I come out with the knockout win for sure. My ability to have been in the ring with some of the best in the heavyweight division so far will be way too much for him. I think he has problems making adjustments as far as fighting guys who can box as well as fighting guys who can throw leather. I studied him for a little while. We were in some heavyweight contract negotiations. I think at this point, he's a top-class heavyweight fighter from the UK. I'm a top-class heavyweight fighter from America. It makes for a great fight. Dominic Breazeale's statements to Sky Sports. So at this point, Dominic Breazeale is not a top-class heavyweight fighter from America. He is a guy that's not really even top 30 at this point. If you look at his record and resume and all the sort of wars that he's been in over the years, this guy has been clearly on the slide, and obviously his punch resistance is not what it once was. And he's looked terrible in recent fights, a la getting knocked out by Deontay Wilder in one round. Also struggled with Carlos Negron to some extent, and Negron for most heavyweight fans is an obscure heavyweight, a former Olympian, but obviously hasn't really done much in the division. And against Eric Molina, who has been bundled out by a lot of fighters early on, Dominic Breazeale struggled with him for the best part of what was it, 8 or 9 rounds. And that was the fight that got Breazeale the WBC mandatory. That was the only reason he got a title shot against Deontay Wilder, and there were murky circumstances in that fight. Breazeale, who at the time wasn't the top-rated contender, fought Molina, who was number 11 in the WBC rankings. Somehow that was made a final eliminator, but we won't go over old ground on that one. But overall here, what do I make of this? Well, it kind of is, I think, I don't want to say it's a joke, but it's approaching that sort of level. Dominic Breazeale is not a player in the heavyweight division right now. How realistic is this fight? I would say his chances of getting it, pretty much zero. And I'm going to make a little sort of comparison here. So remember that movie Meet the Fockers with Ben Stiller. So here, how there was the circle of trust that Robert De Niro had for his family. So there was the circle of trust and everyone who was in it, and then there was Ben Stiller. So see here on screen, this is the graphic. That dot, which says you, that is Dominic Breazeale. He is outside of the circle of trust. He has no show of getting this fight with Dillian Whyte. It's completely unrealistic. He's done at world level. He's a top 30 guy and nothing more at this point. He would actually have to beat some guys of note to get in the conversation for a fight like this with Dillian Whyte. Breazeale may consider himself one of the best American heavyweights at this point, but he's not. He has come up short. He hasn't looked great in recent years. He's actually just had too many wars in his career. His last fight where he looked good was against Izu Agono, and that was at the start of 2017. Since then, he's looked bad against Molina, Negron, and of course, sparked out in a round against Deontay Wilder. Has not been cited since. And just because there was some negotiations some time ago doesn't mean that Breazeale can come back to it and think he's got an automatic right to have a fight against a guy who's in the top 10. At this point, Breazeale doesn't offer anything to Dillian Whyte. If you were to have that fight, There is no way that fans would be on board with it, and it wouldn't make a lot of money. People wouldn't want to buy that fight in the UK. Breazeale has no form to speak of, out of the ring for a year, sparked horrifically in May 2019. There is no way that fight is going to happen. It's not financially viable. It's just not viable at all. Breazeale would need to have a campaign of a few good wins to actually have any shot of any level of fight of that magnitude at this point. And some people might think I'm being a bit harsh here on Breazeale, but the fact is he hasn't done anything lately, and what he has done in his previous few fights didn't look great and obviously sparked out horrifically against Deontay Wilder. It smacks to me of being a cash-out sort of fight. Dominic Breazeale has had a lot of wars in the heavyweight division. He's been in a lot of tough fights, and he's one of these guys, although he's only 34, he's had a lot of miles on the clock, and he's had a lot of stuffing taken out of him through the way that he fights, because he's a guy that comes forward and just takes punishment. He ships punishment, and he just, as Mr. Boxing Today often says of Breazeale, he's one of these guys who's a Coke bottle fighter. You could throw a Coke bottle from the back of the arena and hit Breazeale. Everything hits Breazeale. There is no real defense to speak of, and he talks about being the boxer, but he effectively blocks everything with his face. He talks about being a guy who's more athletic than Dillian Whyte, but let's face it, Dominic Breazeale is slow as molasses in almost every front. He comes plodding forward, throws punches, which you can see from a mile away, and sometimes if he connects, it can hurt. But Dillian Whyte, I think in that fight for most fans, would be a screaming favourite to beat Dominic Breazeale. But I don't want to even really get too much into talking about the matchup because I don't believe it's realistic. And this sort of brings me to the point I wanted to say about Sky Sports. And this is about more media more broadly. And I was talking about this on Patreon in a recent video. In this current climate where we don't have any boxing and sport more broadly, this sort of story is more symptomatic of what we're actually seeing and what's going on. Outlets are effectively, and I've seen this on YouTube as well, creating storylines and narratives effectively from nothing. They've got column inches to fill in papers, websites. They're clearly going out to people, having conversations and doing interviews just to see what they can sort of dig up. And this story about Breazeale is part of that. So they have got some juicy quotes about a fight that he would like to have with Dillian Whyte. And there's no other side of the story. There's no sort of, scrutiny of, is this actually realistic? Is Dominic Breazeale just going for it, making up all this stuff, talking mad greasy about Dillian Whyte, and really this fight is not going to happen? And you have to ask the question, why even run the story? They're just sort of unearthing this from nowhere, and it doesn't really have any validity, or it's not based in reality. But I guess that's sports journalism all over. We see this all the time. But yeah, Dominic Breazeale with his quotes, he is rather delusional here, thinking, one, he could get that fight, but some of the stuff he was saying there, it just doesn't hold up. As I said, and here it is on screen again, there is the circle of trust, and that's the opponents that would be viable for Dillian Whyte inside it, and outside the bubble is Dominic Breazeale. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.